Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us and sticking with us through this massive online vigil. I am now so humbled and honored to be speaking with Ciaron Reilly, one of the most amazing human rights activists who stands in front of the Ecuadorean Embassy day in and day out, making what we do on the vigil for, a day every month or so just look insignificant in comparison. Ciaron, how do you think things have developed on the ground over the last month since the last vigil where you spoke to us on Unity 4J?
Well, it's been a very significant period for Julian and for the Ecuadorian government, for the United States government, and for us taking non-violent direct action and solidarity with Julian in London. So and it also was a period where significant anniversaries occurred. The birth of Julian on the 3rd of July, 47 years ago in Townsville, Queensland, Australia, and also the 6th anniversary on the 19th of June, I believe, of his confinement. So he's been detained for 8 years in England without charge, and he has been confined for 6 years. And as a former prisoner, what I'm struck by, because I've visited him in the embassy over the years, is that it's a situation of definitely of sensory deprivation. You could say solitary confinement in the sense that the only people you meet when you're in solitary, and I've spent time in solitary in Australia and the United States for misbehaviour, or good behaviour, or challenging authority, is you do meet staff even when you're in solitary. So the only people he's meeting is staff of the embassy. And so even when you're in solitary, and they've got like 50, 60,000 people buried alive in solitary in the US system because of the distinction between the United States and Europe. In the European situation, they recognize that human association, mixing with another human being socially in jail, is a human right as significant as ablutions, water, shelter, clothing. That's what the Europeans think. Now, from memory, it's the 8th Amendment that the Supreme Court presently interprets that human association isn't a right in the United States. So they have over 50,000 prisoners in their system of nearly 2.2 million who are indefinitely in solitary confinement. They aren't, however, in sensory deprivation. So I've spent, I'd say, 3 10-day periods in the Brisbane Watch House, constant fluorescent, not being let out of my cell. And that was one of sensory deprivation, and that affects your eyesight. Your eyes don't have to change from 10 meters to 50 meters to 100 meters. I'd still have a 1,000-yard stare if I could see that far. But so that's interesting distinction. So Julian's been in that confinement for 6 years, and visiting him over the years, you can see obvious deterioration in physical and mental health. I mean, we've all got physical and mental health issues. I'm not in a peak condition of either. And so it's to me as a Christian, it's a slow motion crucifixion. And my distress with this situation, yesterday I was with 50,000, mostly gay people in London, around the Trafalgar Square area, and just the disengagement of that occurring in their city, which is supposed to be the font of, the Magna Carta and habeas corpus and British law that's been duplicated. That's why we have a jury system in the United States, Ireland and Australia. You don't have those jury systems in Sweden and Poland and Germany. So, this city that gave us some good things, gave us British imperialism, occupation in Ireland for 800 years, but it also every culture gives us good and bad things. And, the British came up with a queue, which is a good thing, because when you're in a culture that doesn't have a queue, you notice that. And they also came up with habeas corpus, where the arrested couldn't just be held on the word of the king, that they had to be produced publicly in court. Now, that was done away by the Americans at Guantanamo. and seems to be done away in this case, where they're keeping someone indefinitely confined without an outdate, without any public appearances. So yeah, June 19th was very significant, and we attempted to organise things in London. Went well. Over 250 people was the head count at 7 p.m. By a Chilean friend, and that was 5 times up on the previous year, where 50 people gathered with the promise of Julian speaking from the balcony. It was a great variety of people, both culturally and ideologically. And it was a great event in terms of music. So we broke up the speeches, and, you know, with some really good music. Joe Black travelled from Dublin with a vehicle, and they picked up Susan Manning in Wales. And her friend Freddie and Dave did the driving. And that was a great thing to have Chelsea's mother there, standing in solidarity with Julian Assange. And she stayed at our farm, the Catholic Worker Farm that we run for homeless refugee women, and she had a really good time. And we just sent her some flowers. We're a bit slow on doing that, but they're in the post, Susan, if you're listening. And that's been a great relationship that's developed since Chelsea was sentenced, and a relationship primarily between Dublin and Susan's siblings and Chelsea's aunts and uncles and cousins in Haverford, Wales, which is in Pembrokeshire. Someone was giving me the history. That's where Cromwell gathered to invade Ireland historically. Not that we resent that, but so that's the history of that place, and that's where, because it's a militarized area, that's where Susan met her husband, who was a US soldier deployed there, and the first child was born in Wales, and 10 years later, Chelsea Reilly was born in the United States. And so when the marriage ended, Chelsea and Susan returned to Haverford West, and Chelsea went to school there 5 or 6 years. So Chelsea was actually at school there when the war began in 2003, or that the invasion began, and opposed the war in high school. I met Chelsea's high school teachers. Chelsea's quite fluent in Welsh. So that's a great relationship. And then the music was also provided by, I believe, Bolivian indigenous people doing trad, and also John McLean, a Kiwi blues guitarist who would always be outside of court when Julian went to court, and would all sing "I Shall Be Released." Also Walter Heaton, a former prisoner. Now Walter was a combat veteran in the British Army in Malaya in the late 1940s. He actually ended up in Vietnam before the US went into Vietnam, because the French and the British were doing an exchange. And I think Walter did 6 months in Vietnam. This is the late 1940s, early 1950s, when the French were trying to take their colony back. And then Walter was at the Berlin blockade, I think in 1949, before the war went up. And then Walter came home and became an anarchist around Stoke Newington. And he and Rose Dugdale, his partner at the time, became quite famous in Ireland. She was from the British aristocracy. She ended up doing 11 years jail in Ireland. And they got in trouble there, and Walter got framed with an IRA crime, or whether the crime took place or not, he was framed, and he was sentenced to 22 years, and he served 6 before it was overturned. So he was there playing the eve of destruction at 87. And then Alan Jensen, a veteran of the Australian Army during the Vietnam period, he also gave a speech and did a recitation of Banjo Paterson's "The Pub with No Beer," when Banjo Paterson, of course, wrote the classic waltzing Matilda, which is the biggest song in Australia. So we also had started a tradition. Was started by an Australian violinist who was playing waltzing Matilda under Julian's window. And before June 19th, David Rovics, a great American troubadour for the anti-capitalist, anti-war movement, happened to be touring. And he came and played a concert, and then he went under the window and very powerfully sung an accompaniment about solidarity to Julian, who was, we imagine, was just behind the curtains there, only 5 meters away. So we're going to keep that up, and Joe Black and John McLean and the Bolivian trad people have all played songs, and we hope to release those the weeks ahead. And I was hoping Chris Christopherson would come and play, but he only played Dublin last week. I thought if it was a London gig, because he had dedicated a song to a Cis Vietnam veteran, pilot. And so whoever's coming through town, we'll approach to see if they'll play a song of solidarity. In terms of our speaking lineup, that was very powerful. It's pretty full. Craig Murray, the former UK ambassador to Uzbekistan, a whistleblower, he's a great, powerful speaker. And also Laurie Love, recently avoiding extradition to the United States, won his appeal. Very emotional speech, very powerful speech. Andy Worthington, who wrote the book Guantanamo Files, he was dual capable. He spoke and played song, which is great. And Peter Tatchell, who just arrived back from Russia that morning after being released from police custody for staging free speech protests during the World Cup, came along. So it was pretty full thing, but then we put on an open platform and anyone could get up and articulate their position and explain why they'd come there. In the future, I'd like to see the invited speakers, and then I'd like to set up 10 soapboxes around Harrods and around the embassy and kind of transfer Hyde Park there. Because I think for a lot of people who go to demonstrations, they're asked to be quite passive. And a lot of people arrive with a couple of friends, spend the whole time with a couple of friends, don't meet anybody and leave. Well, I think these gatherings are great network opportunities. And if you have a soapbox, what you want is people to interject, I know that as a soapbox speaker, otherwise you just keep saying the same things. And when the crowd does that, I was soapbox speaking at a Christian music festival a couple of years ago, and one guy said, I was in Iraq during the war. Now, a total stranger in that group was in Iraq as well. So they peeled off and had a really interesting conversation. So you got to think laterally. Our slogan, we've started an affinity group, Julian Assange Street Solidarity, and we've also started the Catholic Worker in Camden. And our slogan is, think outside the box. What box? What's that? So that's significant, and that was powerful. Also, we noticed what was significant was the police presence. There was none, and that's very suspicious. So about 5 days before, I was vigiling on my own. Are you still there? It's gone, has it? Okay. It's not working, maybe. She's cut out. Are you still there?
Back. Yeah, I'm still here. I had to grab my charger. I just realized that my laptop was about to die, and if that happens, then the whole conference would be down. So I had to just interrupt and go grab that charger before that happened. But I think it's so important for our audience to hear how your activism developed, and all about the Catholic workers movement. And because I think that even though I think we touched on that last time during the last vigil, I felt like I hadn't asked you enough about that afterwards. So I'd really like to hear how that all developed through your life.
Okay, well, just to finish, about the 19th, what was suspicious was the lack of police. And 5 days earlier, I was vigiling by myself, and about 20 Colombians were due to arrive to protest the Colombian embassy, understandably, in the same building. And 40 minutes before they arrived, 2 uniformed cops had dropped off in an unmarked vehicle and took up position at the entrance to the building that houses both the Ecuadorian and Colombian embassy. So that was normal police procedure. If you're expecting 20 protesters, you drop off to 2 uniformed coppers, right? Now, there was no police presence at all with 250 people. Now, that indicates to me, and I've been involved for 40 years, and one, is they're already there amongst us. We have been infiltrated. Is that a surprise? No. Or they were hoping that people incited by the turning off of the internet and conditions, would be so angry that they would attack the embassy undefended. And so they're the two possibilities. I've had a number of personal experiences with state infiltration. In the 70s, the anarchist network in Brisbane used to meet at Planet Press, and that was owned and run by Dan, I won't say his surname. Now, Dan, now it's come out that he was a special branch asset, that he had infiltrated the Nazi party. There's photographs in the Nazi uniform in the early 70s. He then claimed to the anarchists that he'd had a change of heart, and they bought that. And he brought with him a lot of intel from the Nazi movement in Australia at the time. And then we used to have all our meetings there for years. And now the speculation is that Dan remained a special branch asset and just moved from the Nazis to the anarchists. Secondly, in Liverpool, when we were living with East Timorese refugees and confronting British aerospace in the 1990s, we now know that a man under the name Alan Fossey, we believe him truly to be Sergeant Alistair, former member of the 14 Company. Now, the 14 Company did all the intel gathering for the British SAS, who were running the shoot-to-kill policy in the north of Ireland. They were also the people that followed the Brazilian, mistakenly, thinking he was a Pakistani, and the cops here put 9 bullets in his head on a tube carriage in Stockwell. And that occurred after the London bombings in 2007. That's what 14 Company do. Now, when people leave the Special Forces and 14 Company, the private sector offers them very well-paid jobs. And some of those jobs could be risky, like accompanying ships through pirate-laden areas off Somalia. I know people have done that. Or they can be infiltrating a bunch of hippies, which is pretty unrisky, really. I mean, what are British hippies going to do but get peeved, you know? So, you know, so then that was exposed by the Sunday Times. This group, private intelligence company, had put Alan Fossey with us for 3 years and with the Timorese. So he's probably leaking intel back to the Indonesian embassy, who are killers and torturers, who at that point were still running East Timor. They also had 6 agents in the campaign against the arms trade, including a full-time paid worker. So that was one experience. Now, when I co-founded a Catholic worker here in Haringey, London, Giuseppe Conlon House, and a guy turned up from Ireland who I knew, who had no interest in the Catholic worker, and he moved in. Now, he was using false names the whole time. He would not appear in a photograph. He's never returned to Ireland in 8 years. And he did a lot to undermine the only hub for Julian Assange solidarity in London. Now we know that people in Ireland are suspicious that he was a Irish special branch asset. He then joined the Republican movement, he joined Sinn Féin, and then he moved to the north of Ireland. And we know there's a long history of Irish special branch assets being handed to a special branch in Britain. We also have heard that the Irish special branch had raided his house, taken his laptop, and never given it back. So those inquiries are ongoing, and we're not going to do anything to him, or he's not going to be charged with anything. But he's still active in London, and so that the Vigil has been infiltrated. It's very easy to infiltrate. It's like there's no membership or anything. And the people they send aren't Roger Moore. They're not James Bond. They're not Daniel Craig. They're often very marginal people. Sometimes addicts, as in the case of the Nandamaga 3 in Sydney in the 70s. Sometimes people like our friend in London may have been compromised with what he had on his computer, or they've been busted with smack or child porn or whatever. So also in Dublin, while we were awaiting trial, a man joined our community who's now just finished 12 years for a rape that he was charged with before he joined us. Now, why would you join a group of defendants facing a high-profile trial in Ireland if you're having trouble with the police, if you've been released on bail? Now there's also a case on Irish Indie Media of a man under Pat who was charged with child pornography offences, and then after he's charged, joins Irish Indie Media and sabotages it. So the speculation there is maybe they've got pretty generous bail conditions if they do a job for the state. That's a possibility. It's all speculative. So what we did in response to June 19 is that we formed an affinity group for people who trust each other, who know each other, who are learning more and more about each other in our various skills. And that's how we've been operating since June 19. We haven't that much, but we were back, there was an emergency call out on Friday to come to the embassy, and we did kind of reluctantly because we had decided that we were going to go on the front foot. We were going to start confronting institutions and individuals non-violently who are involved in the ongoing incarceration of Julian Assange, rather than staying on the footpath and having, trouble with other people participating. So since then, on Julian's birthday, we did a scene in the Australian High Commission. The Australian High Commission, and we confronted Alexander Downer, our group, earlier on during the Commonwealth Hubs of Government meeting, and that was Alexander's last week at work, and he's been replaced by George Brandis. Now, George Brandis, two biggest political parties in Australia are the Australian Liberal Party, which are really like British Conservatives, and the Australian Labor Party, which is initially an Irish Catholic phenomenon. So the British ascendancy, people into rugby union, are around the Liberal Party. The Irish Catholic diaspora types, they formed the Australian Labor Party in the 1890s through the Shearers' strike. And they're focused mostly around rugby league, okay? They're the two social strongholds. So Alexander Downer was finishing up. George Brandis, who presents himself as a liberal, not a culturally conservative liberal, has become the High Commissioner in London. And for the first time in 8 years, deploys two of his minions down to the Ecuadorean Embassy to meet Julian Assange. Now, an optimist would say, this is George Brandis. He doesn't see this as a retirement gig where he's going to coast, maybe like Alexander Downer did. He actually takes his position seriously, and he takes himself seriously, and he's going to do what he's paid to do, is that he's going to defend the human rights of an Australian in trouble abroad. Okay, now it doesn't matter if you're in Southeast Asia, it doesn't matter if you're in the United States, if you're in jail, the Australian Embassy comes to see you, something they haven't done with Julian Assange in 6 years of confinement, 8 years of detention. Now, when I was in jail in Texas, the Australian Embassy consulate came up from Houston to visit me. And the guy was quite nice and used to send me cricket scores and stuff, even though I wasn't interested in cricket. But at my trial, when 140 of our people, and we disrupted the sentencing of us, the 4 of us being sentenced for disabling a B-52 bomber, and we disrupted the judge and said, you can't do this. You're about to criminalise peacemaking and make legal the killing of children. We're not going to cooperate. And we moved from the circle of the court, knelt down and said the Lord's Prayer. Now, our 100 people who come to support us all started having a go at the judge. So they were predictably removed from the courtroom. And these are all Catholic worker types, pacifists. So then the door opens and 3 guys in suits come in with the FBI and the court officials. And I said, who are those guys? And they say, that's the Australian Embassy, right? So they'd been there all morning, didn't come up and say, Ciaron, with the Australian Embassy, we're here to protect your human rights. They hung out with the FBI all morning. And their job was not to protect my human rights, but to put me in prison as quickly as possible. This is what they did with David Hicks. This is what they do with Julian Assange. So if you're in trouble for drugs, smack, in Bali or Thailand as an Australian, and I don't resent this, this is their job, they should be visiting you and defending your human rights, which means campaigning against the death penalty in those places. Now, if you're in trouble politically with the United States, you're going to get nothing off them. You're going to get more than nothing off them. You're going to get frog-marched into jail by the Australian High Commission and the embassies. That's my personal experience. That's the experience of David Hicks and Julian Assange. Now, the Catholic worker, that's interesting because we've been around for 85 years, right? And we're facing co-option. We're facing our radicals. I don't understand it. Our radicals end up in jail. So while the radicals are absent, the moderates move in. And I recently submitted an article to the New York Catholic Worker. They edited it and took out every reference to Manning Assange, right?
Wow.
This is a newspaper started by Dorothy Day, an anarchist suffragette who became a Catholic, who the church wants to canonize, whose granddaughter is electronically tagged, having been arrested with 6 other Catholic workers attempting to disable the Trident submarine on the 4th of April this year, the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Martin Luther King. And they did that action at the Kings Bay naval thing. So we've still got 4 of our people in prison, lousy prison in rural Georgia. They have 1 hour exercise a week. They have 1 15-minute visit a week. They have limited phone access, etc. So they're sharing some of the conditions that Julian is experiencing. Now, 3 of them have been released, electronically tagged, $5,000 bail. Now, Martha Hennessy, the granddaughter of Dorothy, soon to be St. Dorothy, when the Pope spoke in Congress, he referenced 3 Americans, Martin Luther King, Abraham Lincoln, and Dorothy Day, right? That's how significant Dorothy Day is. Now, she's electronically cuffed, and she lives on a farm in Vermont half the time. She can't make it to a chicken coop without setting this thing off, you know? And then she's allowed to go to her workplace, which is Mary House for homeless women on East 3rd Street. And for an hour and a half on a Sunday, they'll let her go to church and come back. If she's out for more than an hour and a half, she's breached bail and be returned to jail. Carmen Trotter is at the men's house on East 1st Street, and he's got an ailing father. So they let him an hour and a half, I believe, to get from Lower East Side of New York to Long Island to his father on a Thursday afternoon. Now, they also let him go to church for an hour and a half on Sunday. And otherwise, this is our future. Charge, bail or no bail, they're going to have all of us electronically tagged, maybe internally chipped, as Julian predicts. But it's a sad future. And, you know, being at the gay parade yesterday with 50,000 educated, mostly educated people, I don't see the resilience in our culture, gay or heterosexual, to resist what's coming down the pipe. And it's quite frightening. And the Catholic worker, who's had decades of people imprisoned in World War II and Vietnam for burning draft cards, for raiding draft boards, in Ploughshares actions, half the people who've done Ploughshares actions, Catholic workers, they should know about prison solidarity. They should know the significance of offering solidarity to Chelsea Manning and Julian Assange. And to have those 2 names removed from my article is disgusting. It's a betrayal of Dorothy Day, of Jesus Christ, of radical Catholicism. And so within every movement, there's an internal debate between the radicals and the moderates. There are people in the Catholic work who want to push us into a professional NGO. There are people in the Catholic worker who are entryists, like the Trotskyist tactic, who aren't Catholics, who aren't anarchists, who aren't pacifists, but they see we've built up infrastructure over 85 years. We've got buildings and a brand name and stuff, and they've gone in with their own agenda, whether it be identity politics or whatever agenda, to enter the movement. Now, you know, the radicals, we're exhausted confronting the state. We're either in jail, electronically tagged, or trying to help Julian Assange. And now we've got to fight people. We got a back action coming. We got, like, what do you call it? A rear guard action, you know? So we're deployed against the state. We're interested in serving the poor, you know, and being in solidarity with the poor, with the homeless, the crazed, the addicted. Now, that's exhausting work. And we're also concerned about confronting those institutions that create poverty and war. And we have to watch our backs, you know, from people who are younger and fitter and maybe smarter, you know, technologically, definitely. So we're in our own struggles. So you don't want to romanticize anything and anyone. To romanticize, say, the Aboriginal people is as racist as to demonize them. To romanticize Julian Assange as a person is as silly as to demonize him. To romanticize the Catholic worker or the Irish Republican movement or punk rock or feminism is as silly, or the gay movement is as silly as to demonize them. So we've got some new ideas. I know, is there any other questions about the Catholic worker tradition? Or?
Oh, I just didn't know if you would want to kind of just explain how it was founded, because I know that when I interviewed you and spoke to you, you explained that to me, and I later wrote about that in an article, but I'm sure that most of our viewers haven't seen that and don't know what the Catholic worker movement is. So if you wanted to just kind of explain that for a few minutes, that I thought that would be great for the audience to hear about.
Okay, some resources, you can Google it, but there's a Martin Sheen film with Moira Kelly, Irish actress. It's not a great movie. It's a bit like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, but presented fairly one-dimensionally. But Dorothy was a suffragette. She dated Eugene O'Neill, the great playwright. She was working for the masses alongside Emma Goldman and John Reed. If you see the film Reds, which is heavily suppressed, that's the milieu she was mixing in. She then has a crisis following a couple of abortions and then gave birth to a child. And this seems very significant in her conversion. And she becomes a Catholic, much distressed to her anarchist partner, Foster, I think his name was. And so that relationship ends. She's a writer. She writes a screenplay for Hollywood. And she covers the great protests of the 1930s during the Depression. And in response to that, she meets an old French philosopher influenced by the personalist school, Peter Morin. And he has a vision of a fairly anarchist, pacifist Christian vision of the world. He's critical of both the left, which Stalinism was popular then amongst the left, and the right. Mussolini was elected for 20 years, and I think the Nazis were elected as well. So you had these big totalitarian movements, and his response was decentralized and personalist. He argued that what was needed during the Depression was not the 5-year deal or big institutions or NGOs, but Catholics to rediscover what's called the acts of mercy, to feed the hungry at their personal expense, to visit the imprisoned, to bury the dead, to instruct the ignorant. Now, part of our co-option is that we've become institutions, like the church itself. We get obsessed with buildings. The good news is the Camden Catholic Worker doesn't have a building. And so the movement starts and gets very popular in the 30s during the Depression. It then splits in World War II when Dorothy comes out clearly as a pacifist. And some young men left the movement, joined the American army. They thought to fight fascism, although the result of World War II was United States throughout Southeast Asia and the Middle East and Latin America. Fascism won World War II. The reasons why young men fight wars and young women, and the reason why wars are fought are completely different. And if it was a war against fascism, they would have invaded Spain and Portugal. That was clearly fascist. And but the US went on to support every fascist dictator, overthrowing democracies in Central America, South America, Indonesia, and the Middle East. And so the Catholic worker men who didn't go, they went to prison. They were interned. They were put in internment camps. There was actually a discussion within the FBI on whether to intern Dorothy Day as a national security threat during World War II. The Kennedys came to visit Dorothy Day. John and his older brother, who was later killed in the war, Joseph, who was being groomed to run for presidency until he was killed. Now, they came down during World War II before they were deployed, and they came over to Catholic work and took Dorothy out from Yale and all that kind of stuff. They later came back in the late 1950s. And lots of different people have come through the Catholic working movement. Jeremy Scarhill, obviously being one of the more famous ones, who've come through it and concluded it wasn't for them, but it was definitely part of their formation. Now, there was a guy in the 50s called Michael Harrington, and he was there for a few years, and then he came out and he wrote a book called The Other America, and that had a big influence on the Kennedys' war on poverty. He then started a socialist faction in the Democrat Party, and so people have come through our movement and gone on to do good things. Some of them, I think Harrington was quite critical of our movement, thought we were too utopian. Maybe it's a worthy criticism. Jeremy's probably critical of, our pro-life stance. There's all sorts of people who've come through the movement. So you don't have to be Catholic. You don't have to be an anarchist. You don't have to be a pacifist to participate in the movement or be in the communities. There are Jewish people, there's atheist people. And that's both a strength and a weakness. All your blessings are curses. One is we're very open to people. And two is some of those people come in with agendas to co-opt the movement. And now you're seeing a big thrust from younger people with identity politics. They're pushing the white guilt thing, talking about white supremacy. Like, we've got a Slovak woman in our group. You want to call her a white supremacist? You want to call a Czech person a white supremacist when they've been colonized by Russia? You want to call Irish people white supremacists when we've had 800 years of British occupation? Like, it's just bullshit ideology. And there's an old saying on the left, someone, the revolution will devour its young. The revolutionary, or people who claim to be revolutionary now, are devouring their elders. They're no platforming Peter Tatchell. They're no platforming Germaine Greer. They're physically attacking me at the Anarchist Book Fair. You know, they physically attacked the Chelsea Manning Solidarity gig we had in Liverpool. So it's not the young being devoured, it's by these lynch mobs, it's the dinosaurs. Now, part of that dynamic is, do you know who Mark Chapman is? Does that name mean anything to you?
It rings a bell. I know I should know it, and it's on the tip of my tongue, but I'm not recalling exactly right now. So please let me know and let the rest of the audience know.
It's probably an age thing, because Mark Chapman assassinated John Lennon, right? And anyone my age would know that name and who that was. Right. We only know of Mark Chapman because he assassinated John Lennon. He would be an unknown person in Hawaii, right? He's still in jail in Sing Sing. Now, if these young people in their student unions can't be Peter Tatchell, can't be Germaine Greer, they can be Mark Chapman. They can't be John Lennon. They can brag to their mates, I know platformed Peter Tatchell. What a legend I am. I know platformed Germaine Greer. That's a big motivation. You know, young people are searching for identity. They're trying to break away from their parents. They confuse Peter Tatchell with being their father or Germaine Greer being their mother, and they're venting all this stuff. They really need to take the therapy, you know? And, you know, as they say, get a room or get a whatever, you know. So it should not be played out in public, and it should not be undermining serious radical people doing serious radical work for someone like Julian Assange, who is a human being, who's detained without charge, ongoing, indefinite, in sensory deprivation, you know. So, you know, I was getting attacked when I was emceeing the June 19th event. And eventually after the 6th, there was a Trotskyist group trying to intervene and take over the thing. And eventually I just decided after the 6th one, I said, I'm just going to, something happened. I'm emceeing. It's like herding cats. It's a fluid situation. Like Craig was our main speaker. Understandably, he was late because he was caught on a train delay. Now that was fluid. We're hoping for another main speaker. She had to cancel. So the situation was stressful and fluid. The last thing I needed was some Trotskyist opportunist ambulance chasing group trying to take over, for interest of social media profile, the event. So, you know, after 6 times of trying to explain, you'll have your say during the open platform, I just began to turn on my heel. And if you watch the live feed, it's a bit like Benny Hill, you know, I'm getting chased all over the place by these people. And it was very stressful, and it led to PTSD 2 days later. Now, where PTSD comes from, and my godson, you know, was in the SAS in Iraq, in Afghanistan, there's 2 things. There's PTSD and there's moral failure. Now, PTSD, I think, is the suppression of emotion. Now, if you're on the battlefield and your good mate takes a shot to the face, you can't get emotional. You can't feel sorry for him because you might get a shot to the face next, or your other mate might get it. You got to suppress that emotion and keep functioning. And that led to me for a nervous breakdown in 2013 during following Chelsea Manning's 3-month court martial. And I was also working on a trial in Queensland, Rockhampton at the time. So I was working on a trial 9 hours ahead in Australia and 5 hours behind in the States from London. And I had people in my community, including a special branch asset, trying to wind me up and break down, cease to function as an asset for Julian Assange in London. And I did break down. I was out of action, I'd say, for 1.5 years. Now I'm back, and I've learned lessons. And part of that lesson is who to trust and who not to trust in a situation that is full of jeopardy. You know, there's people who claim to be on our side waiting for me to fall on my face, waiting for me to stop functioning. And there are evil people who don't mind killing and torturing people. They usually do it overseas when they fly out of Heathrow, but they're in the game as well. You know, it's a serious game. And so I just began turning on my heel. And then there are some people who are very toxic to me. So what I've done, I'm now in a community of 4 people. We're getting to know each other more. We've been very active. We've done a lot of stuff, intervening around the World Cup in Australian pubs and going to Australia House. And We're learning more and more about each other and how to function. And I'm accountable to them, because I'm articulate and I've got a profile. I've been around for 40 years. And so I'm accountable to these three people. They can pull me up and say, you really lost your cool there, or you're wielding your power in an unjust way, or we're worried about your mental health, or whatever. Now, a Catholic worker is someone who wants, a good Catholic worker is someone who wants to live an intentional and accountable life, okay? Not just drift through life. Now, I know what I'm intentional about. At the moment, I'm intending to offer solidarity with Julian Assange, because I am what Julian will be or could be. I'm a former prisoner of the United States, okay? So if people want to question my authority, and authority in a good word way, that's where the authority comes from. And I'm willing to take legal advice. I'm willing to be pulled up by my affinity group. And also the people who are toxic to me, I will not talk to them directly. They will talk to someone in my affinity group. If they've got concerns or they've got information, they will come through a gatekeeper. And that helps me to function. And so we organised events in Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne. We came close to LA, we had Martin Sheen on board. And so we can do that in future. We had Alex Cox outside. I hadn't seen Alex for 18 years, but he trusts me. It's all about trust. Once the trust is gone, it's gone. So, and the trust has gone with people I work very closely around this. And it can't be revisited unless you had a facilitator in a very formal setting. So Alex, I haven't seen. He launched my book on East Timor back in 2000, when New York got attacked, about a month after New York attacked, 2001. So I haven't seen Alex since 2001. Haven't had a lot of email contact with him. His mother turned 100. He was coming to England. He wanted to see me. I said, Alex, how do you feel about Julian Assange? And would you like to speak under his window? Alex said, fine. And bought us a beer and everything. So he's back in the States now. Yeah.
It's interesting.
Very important. So it's about trust, even though we haven't seen each other for 19 years. Now, we screwed up. One thing we screwed up on was Alex is fluent in Spanish. We had him outside the Ecuadorean Embassy. We didn't think to ask him one question in English and he would respond in Spanish. So, there's always, I was in a little group called the Young Christian Students when I was 16, and their motto was act, reflect, act again. So whenever we do an action, we reflect on it, we work out what went well, what could be improved on, like getting Alex Cox to speak in Spanish, which he's fluent in, and we'll improve, we'll keep improving. Yesterday we got bad intel. 2 of us deployed to Trafalgar Square expecting England versus Sweden, and there were 50,000 gay people. Now, some of them were football fans, but it was a small minority. And so, we just vigiled amongst the gay folks, and that was fine. But, our intel gathering could improve. And that's twice we deployed to the Trafalgar Square. We were told there'd be these big screens and stuff. So we're doing a lot of work around Camden, organising work, and in Brisbane, and also on the idea of the 7th, we're developing. The 7th is the day Julian Assange is lifted in London and taken to HMP Wandsworth, 7th of December 2010. So the 7th is going to be a day that we're going to return to the High Commission. Maybe the next delegation will be all Ecuadorians. Maybe the next one will be artists. Maybe the next one will be clerics, And this will happen at Department of Federal and Trade in Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne. And the next one in Brisbane is highly likely to have Julian Assange's father, John Shipton. And we're looking at an event. Have you ever read Tom Wolfe's Radical Chic?
No, I haven't, but I'll add it to my reading list. It sounds great.
It's only a very short book. It's a satire.
Oh, satire is wonderful.
I think Wolfe was kind of conservative, really.
Yeah.
Yes. And Leonard Bernstein was a wonderful liberal conductor. And he used to finance people facing trial in the 60s. He did things for the Black Panthers at his home. And he did one for the Berrigans. I think it's the Harrisburg conspiracy trial. Liz McAllister, who's presently in jail at 78 with the recent Ploughshares action. Her and her husband were framed with a conspiracy to kidnap Henry Kissinger. They just took a little street theatre idea of citizens' arrest and hyped it up. So that was J. Edgar Hoover and Nixon trying to finish off the Catholic left in the 60s. And Bernstein had a fundraiser at his house. So that's what we're going to have in Brisbane. We're going to have Julian Stad. We're going to have activists and organisers, but also people who are willing to donate some money. And we'll try and source some good music and some good speakers. And it'll be a bit like Radical Chic. People might even dress that way. So that's a little idea we're toying with. But definitely the 7th will be, we've got solid people in Melbourne, Davey Heller. We've got solid guy in Sydney, Reverend Dave Smith. We've got solid people in Brisbane. We've got solid people, really solid people in Dublin who went through 3 of our trials together, who went through great support for Chelsea Manning. And in Dublin, we had an Indigenous Australian, and June Kelly from Tasmania, who's living in Ireland. She delivered the open letter to the Australian Embassy. But also, Dublin's a small place. You can get access to major international actors and rock stars and stuff pretty easily. London's a big place. So you're only two or three steps. Like I'm 1, 2, 3 steps away from Mel Gibson. Now, whether he's a liability or an asset, I don't know. But, then you get the person. I'm not the best person to ask everyone, but I'll find the best person to throw that pitch, because often you only get one chance to throw the pitch. So if you want someone like Jermaine Greer or Mel Gibson, you find the person who knows them, who they trust, could be Martin Sheen, could be someone else, to throw that pitch and that invitation, So that's the way I organise. I organise with minimal resources. I have no funding base besides sporadic donations. And I'm working off a couch in Camden and a backpack in Hands Crescent. And people kind of trust me. They trust me to work hard and not to be stupid with money. And although the cigars might be a bit of a contradiction to that. But I'm going to deal with that nicotine addiction. But I was running on 2 to 3 hours sleep for about 3 weeks. It was pretty much a caffeine nicotine diet. And I didn't start smoking until I was 40. Then I got onto this snus stuff, which is Swedish or something, which is cheaper and stronger. But I need to get off that. And so I'm just kind of winding down now and try and look at what we did over the last 3 weeks of intense activity. And like a friend of mine, well, he's not my friend, a friend of my brother's, we were at a school, Christian Brothers School in Brisbane, 500 of us, all boys. And the guy running a major hospital here in London was in my brother's class. And I was at the same school with him for 6 years. And I rang the hospital on Friday afternoon at 5 p.m., which isn't a great time to ring. And I said, asked him to deliver this letter, right? And he's, I believe, a fairly conservative man. Now, he emailed me back on the Monday asking me to meet for coffee and a pint, So that's one thing that came out of the flurry of activity. So I've now got to find all these scraps of paper I wrote numbers down on and stuff and collect them. And I feel good. I feel like I'm with 3 people I trust. And now the situation with the Ecuadorean Embassy has changed. Now the Ecuadorian government are trying to put the president who gave Julian Assange asylum in prison himself. So it kind of might be difficult to celebrate that anniversary since it's now moot. But this Friday, we got Donald Trump, the Commander-in-Chief, arriving in London. There's an opportunity,
Very much an opportunity. I hope you guys get his attention. I really do. But because...
Well, even to engage the people who are out in the streets before Trump on the incarceration of Julian Assange is the thing worthy of doing,
Yeah, definitely. Very, very much.
A prisoner of Trump right here in their city. Have you got another question?
Oh, well, I'm going to right this second. I know that oftentimes our chat doesn't really ask too many questions, but I'm going to ask again. Anybody, if you have any questions you want to ask of Ciaron before this segment's over, please write them down in the YouTube chat, and I will see them in the Etherpad, and I will relay those to Ciaron. So
So we've got
checking
about
that right now.
we've got about 10 minutes, have we?
Yeah, we've got about 10. If there's no more questions and anything that you want to talk about related to Julian Assange and WikiLeaks would be great to hear from you. Just any thoughts that you want to add to what we've already talked about.
Okay, another plan we're working on it with American Catholic workers and Irish Catholic workers, is there's two big events. There's a visit of Donald Trump to London this Friday, and then there's a visit of the Pope to Ireland at the end of August. And there are three people at jeopardy. Obviously, Julian, most at jeopardy, and we know about his case. The other people are a Jesuit, 5 Catholic workers, and Liz McAllister, the widow of Phil Berrigan, who are facing serious felonies for their attempt to disable a nuclear submarine, Trident submarine. Now, Steve Kelly's done 10 years in jail already. He's a Jesuit priest, usually does his time in solitary, refuses to cooperate. He's not going to be allowed out of jail. They're not offering him bail, any kind of bail. Liz McAllister remains in jail, along with Claire Grady from Ithaca, Liz McAllister from Jonah House, and Mark Colville. He's from a Catholic worker in Amstead, I think it's Pennsylvania, to be wrong. And then out on electronically tagged is Carmen Trotter, who's been a New York Catholic worker since the late 1980s. Good Elvis impersonator, sings a good Johnny Cash and Phil Oakes. Martha Hennessy, the granddaughter of Dorothy Day, and Patrick O'Neill, who's based in North Carolina. So they're the second group. The third group is Colin Roddy and Dave Donlan, who trespassed at Shannon Airport. Now, Ireland's a neutral country, but has become a major hub for the US military because of the small airport at Shannon. I myself and 4 others were arrested there, charged with $2.5 million criminal damage in February of 2003, and we're facing a 10-year max, and we had 3 trials, and we eventually found unanimously not guilty of those offences. And it's very interesting that WikiLeaks released cables from the US Embassy following our acquittal, how freaked out the US government was by that acquittal. Now, Dave and Colin have had their trial, it's a jury trial, moved to Dublin. So we're going to focus around those 3 cases, and we're going to go to Ireland, and we're going to, under the slogan, it's a scriptural quote, "The truth will set you free, free Julian Assange," under the quote by John Paul II, "War is always a failure for humanity, demilitarise Shannon Airport," and under the slogan, "It's a sin to build a nuclear weapon," which I think is by Father Richard McSorley, who I knew in DC, who was actually a prisoner of the Japanese. He survived the Bataan Death March as a young seminarian during World War II. And that will be Free the Kings Bay Ploughshares. So we're going to, people from the United States will meet us in Ireland. They'll speak, they'll do music, and maybe some Irish people will go to the States, and some Irish people will come to London for Trump's visit. So we're kind of building up those very grassroots bonds of trust and activism. That's our project for the immediate 2 months. And then, it's all about passing the ball and giving people a good pass with good information so that they turn up in Trafalgar Square expecting a football match. So, so that's it, really.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for explaining that. I'm really glad that we got to hear a little bit more about the Catholic workers movement, because it's something that you obviously, it's kind of where your activism stems from in such a big way. And I know, to myself and many others, you and the rest of the people involved in Wise Up are absolute heroes to us. So it's always, pleasure and humbling to speak with you. And best of luck in your continuing vigils. You're doing amazing work.
Likewise, good luck with your good work, and we're all gifted in different ways. And me walking into the High Commission and ranting or speaking like that is effortless to me. Like, I can't drive a car. That would be very stressful. Never been in a moving car by myself in my life. So we're all gifted with different gifts, and we should do the things that are effortless and less stressful, because we're in a very stressful situation.
I agree. Yeah, it's like, and that's one of the things I really tried to talk about in the last vigil around what was specifically that just because you aren't able to go on the street or write an article or be on social media, that there are infinite number of ways that you can use your own tools and talents to work.
When I'm operating, it's a bit like Jason Bourne, James Bond. Like I'm running through the streets of London, not knowing where I'm going. I've got an earpiece in, and they're going, turn left, turn right. I've got like, you know, Mr. or Mrs. Moneypenny back at, you know, who can't get out because they're minding a baby or something, right? And they're giving me directions, and I'm taking intel, and I trust them, you know. So you don't have to be anywhere near the Ecuadorian Embassy or London.
Yeah.
Contribute to the people, to Julian Assange primarily, and people who are on the streets. And so, you know, that Judy Small lyric, although she's a federal judge now, that because we can do little, we do nothing at all. We're so self-centering. We're so underestimating of our gifts and the significance it is to other people. And so I encourage people, Australians, to sign that open letter. I encourage people to write to Julian, talk about their lives, talk about things they're experiencing, because he's in a very limited area. And I have been with him when he opened mail, like that, correspondence, and he gets nourished by it like every prisoner does. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for that as well. And that's something that we talked about in the last vigil a lot, that being the importance of letter writing when a prisoner is isolated. So there's definitely something that people should keep in mind. And I will repost the address of the Ecuadorian Embassy so that people can send letters.
And with the open letter, some people thought it was just for June 19th, but we're going to keep returning with that letter. Great. The most famous person in my family, Ken McCaffrey, who's 87. He played for Australia, rugby league, for most of the 1950s. And he's very sympathetic to my work. Now, I'm going to get him to sign that, right? Or ask him to sign it. If he signs it, a lot of rugby league players are going, well, if it's good enough to Ken, it's good enough for us, you know? So it's about building blocks. You get that, you put that there and that there. So if, you know, you don't have to be high profile to sign it. It's great to read through the list and see the pluralism and backgrounds and where people come from. And you don't have to be living in Australia, you know. So encourage people to really promote that open letter, and we'll keep bringing it back to the embassy. This next time with 500, next time with 1,000. Boom, boom, boom. Yeah.
Great. Well, on that optimistic note, thank you so much for your time and joining us. And I guess we will see you next time if we have another vigil like this.
Launcher.
Bye.
Bit of Gaelic for you.
Yes.
Thank you.